Good morning, Morai Rabotai. We are continuing our Masechet Chagigah and we are on the Chaf Dalet Amud Aleph at the bottom of the Amud by 2 dots. Today's Amud is being learned for Zchut, Yoshua ben Dina Diana and Yael bat Rivka. Today's Amud is also being learned Leilui Nishmat Tzipora bat Yitzchak. So we started this last topic of the Mishnah over here, that if you have Truma, when it that your other hand becomes Tameh. In other words, the Mishnah said, if one hand becomes Tameh, my other hand is Tahor when I'm dealing with Teruma, but not if I'm dealing with Kodesh. Now you read the Mishnah, you think it's talking about not touching at all. If this hand becomes Tameh, the other hand automatically is Tameh. And we mentioned that that's not the case. Rav Shizbi said, we're talking about a case that as I'm holding the Kodesh with my Tahor hand, with my good hand that has not touched the Tum'ah, my other hand is holding on, is mechubar, is attached to my hand. So the hand that became Tameh is attached to the other hand that's holding the Kodesh, even though that my Tameh hand is not touching the Kodesh, it's just attached to my other hand. And that's when we say why Kodesh is a problem. And yet, even in that case, is not a problem for Teruma, only for Kodesh. And we had a question back and forth. What exactly is the problem? Is it a problem that we are choshesh, we are concerned that if my hand is touching my other hand, it may as well come to touch the Kodesh, and that's the problem? Or is it because it transfers the Tum'ah once it touches my hand, just this hand that became Tameh at some point touching the other hand, even though that at the time that this other hand touches the Kodesh, the Tameh hand is removed and it's not touching anything, that will be still a problem. That's the back and forth that we had. So let's read the Gemara that we had yesterday and then continue. So Amar Rav Shizbi bechiburin shanu. Rav Shizbi said, we only are talking about the case that the Tameh hand is touching the Tahor hand. That's when the second hand also receives a level of Tum'ah. But if they're not touching, then it's not a problem. That means even by Kodesh, if my left hand touched Tum'ah and now is Sheni Tum'ah, my right hand still could touch Kodesh and there's no problem with that whatsoever. So that's what Rav Shizbi said. Abaye said he can't say that because we learned in a Braita that when you have a hand that's dry by Naguv, says the Braita, Yad neguva metamea chaverta letameh lekodesh, aval lo litruma. If a dry hand touches the other hand, then it becomes a problem for kodesh, but not for teruma. This is what Rabbi says. Rabbi Yehuda says, lifsol aval lo letameh. It becomes only pasul, but not tameh. That means the second hand becomes shelishi, and touching the Kodesh becomes Revi'i, whereas Rabbi, the original one, was saying, my second hand becomes Sheni, and touching Kodesh becomes Shelishi. But be that as it may, both of them say it becomes a problem, becomes Metameh et HaKodesh. And now Abaye says, what's the case that we are talking about that makes a difference if my first hand is Naguv, is dry? If it's like Rav Shizbi said it's only when it's touching. And we say that the second hand becomes Tameh because we are concerned that your hand, once it's touching the other hand, is going to touch the Kodesh too. If that's the Chashash, does it make a difference if the hand is dry or wet? Absolutely not. You're only concerned that my hand being in the vicinity of the Kodesh is going to already touch the Kodesh. Doesn't make a difference if it's wet or dry. Makes no difference. So says Rabbi, the only reason that the dry makes a difference is because we have the Gezerah of Yud Chet Davar, right? That when we had this in Masechet Shabbat, we had this Masechet Brachot, that if my hand are Sheniyot Letum'ah, and it's wet, the water droplets on top of my hand become Rishon Letum'ah. And when that wet hand touches the other hand, this automatically becomes Shani Letum'ah. So it would not be a chidush in the shita of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, that my second hand becomes Shani Letum'ah. The only chidush is if it's even dry. Oh, it's dry. Shani Letum'ah touching another dry. This would at most become Shalishi, right? And the chidush of Rabbi is it becomes Shani Letum'ah, even the second hand. And then when you touch Kodesh, the Kodesh becomes Tameh, not Pasul, becomes Shalishi, not Revi, right? So this is the chidush. Therefore, says Abaye, you see, not like the chidush of Rav Shizbi. Rav Shizbi said, only when I'm holding the Kodesh and my hand is literally mechubar, touching my other hand, that's when it's Tameh. Abaye says, no. For one moment, you touch this hand, and this is now Tameh. The second hand also becomes Tameh, and that's the rush of the Mishnah, that if one hand became Tameh, and you touched other hand for even 1 second, this hand is Tahor for handling Terumah, but this hand will be Tameh for handling Kodesh, and that's the Chumrah of Kodesh over Terumah. So this is what we discussed briefly yesterday. Now the Gemara says like this. Itmar Nami, we'll argue size Itmar Nami, but many of the Ramban, the Baal Meor, many others, they take the Itmar Nami, the Nami part out because it's not a continuation of the machloket that we had before. The Shagadarye in Turei Even tries to explain it the way we have it in the Gemara by Itmar Nami, but be that as it may, we have a machloket Resh Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. The machloket is, how about if I touch your hand? My hand became Tameh. Now I touched your hand. Does your hand become Tameh? So says the Gemara, Amar Resh Lakish. Resh Lakish says, Lo shanu ela yado. Aval yad chavero. If I touched your hand, look, then it's not a problem, right? But Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Rabbi Yochanan says, no, that's not correct. Echad yado ve'echad yad chavero. Doesn't make a difference if it's my hand touching my own other hand or my hand touching your hand. Both cases, both scenarios, it becomes tameh, the second hand. So says the Gemara, be'ota yad, it's in that hand that became tameh. In other words, if my left hand became tameh, if I touch my right hand becomes tameh. If I touch your hand becomes tameh. But if I touch my hand, my right hand, and then my right hand touches your hand, that's fine. It doesn't go 2 steps, right? It only goes 1 step. You have 1 life, so to speak. You touch this hand, whatever you touch first is tameh. But if I touched already my other hand and my other hand touched your hand, then you're fine. So that's why it says be'otayad, on that hand that became tameh. That hand could go ahead and make yad chavero, the hand of your friend, also tameh, 1 step further, but not your hand that was tahor. In other words, if my left hand that became tameh touched my right hand, and my right hand touched your hand, then your hand is fine, right?
Your hand and his hand, the same hand makes the tameh. Your hand, and then he touches his hand.
No, again, it goes only 1 step.
The same hand, though, not the one that touches. This one's tameh, I touch his tameh. Then this one, the same one, touches this. That one make it tameh.
The hand that was tameh, if it touches his hand, it becomes tameh. That's yad chavero. Echad yado ve'echad yad chavero b'ota yad difsol, aval lo letameh. It makes it pasul but not tameh. That means my first hand is sheni letumah. When I touch my second hand becomes shelishi letumah. And when I touch the Kodesh, not the Kodesh becomes Pasul, but not Tameh. It means it becomes Revi'i, not Shelishi. Fine. Simple. These are simple stuff, right? The kindergarten kids, right? So says the Gemara, Mimai, midekatani sefa, shayad metameh chaverta, lekodesh. Rabbi Yochanan says, where do I know this halacha? I'll show you. Because it says in the end of the Mishnah, let's go back to the Mishnah in Daf Chaf, in the Chaf Amud Bet, the Mishnah that we had, there this is the longest actually item that we had in the Mishnah. The Mishnah explains it. It says, "Ubitruma im nitmet achad miyadav." This is 4 lines up from the bottom of the Amud in Chaf Amud Bet. "Ubitruma im nitmet achad miyadav chavertat Torah." In Teruma, handling Teruma, if one of your hands became tameh, your other hand is fine. You can handle Teruma, no problem. Ubekodesh, but by Kodesh, matpil shenehen, you have to dip both of your hands in the mikveh. You have to be metahir both of your hands. Why? And then he goes over it. We said all the halachot. In this line and a half, we already said all the halachot. But the Gemara goes over it. The Mishnah rather goes over it again. Says because yad metamet chaverta b'kodesh, avalo b'truma. Because in kodesh the halacha is one hand makes the other one tameh. But in Teruma is not like that. In Teruma, if one hand became Tameh, only that hand is a problem. Your other hand could handle Teruma, no problem. So you review the Mishnah is kind of superfluous. He goes over it again. You said the halacha to me that by Teruma, my other hand is fine. By Kodesh, you have to be Matpil Shenehem. That's exactly what I need to know. And you go over it to say it again in the Sefer of the Mishnah. Why? So says Rabbi Yochanan, from that redundancy and repetition of the Mishnah, I learned this halacha. How so? Says the Gemara. Mimai, how do I know this halacha? Midekatani sefa, because in sefa it says shahayat metameh chaverta lekodesh avalo litruma. Because your hand, says the Mishnah, makes its friend, meaning the other hand, tameh for kodesh, but not for teruma. That's the din at the end of our Mishnah. Hatu lamari, why do you have to say it again? You said it in the Resha. Hatana le Resha. In the Resha, you said it already. How did you say it? Because you said, you see in the Resha, you said exactly the same thing. Obitruma im nitmet achad miyadav. In teruma, if one of your hands became tameh, chaverta Torah. The other one is tahor. Isn't that the same exact thing? You're essentially saying the same thing in 2 different ways within 2 lines. Why do you have to repeat it? Says Rabbi Yochanan. Ela lav shma mina le'atye yad chavero. When it says hayad metameh chaverta, means not only your other hand, that in Kodesh, if one hand became tameh and you touch your own other hand, the hand becomes tameh. Not only that, but even yad chavero. Even if I touch somebody else's hand, that somebody else's hand also becomes tameh in Kodesh. That's the chidush of the Mishnah, that hence the repetition in the Resha and Sefer of our Mishnah coming to tell you not only your other hand becomes tameh by Kodesh, but even if you touch somebody else's hand, now they are incapable of touching and handling Kodesh as well. Says the Gemara. Isn't it coming to add Yad Chavero, the hand of your friend, that if you, with your tameh hand, touch the hand of your friend, he also becomes incapacitated to handle Kodesh, and that's the proof of Rabbi Yochanan. The Gemara concurs with that, and not only that, the Gemara says, even Resh Lakish was chozer. In other words, we just got finished saying a machloket Resh Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Resh Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan were not just brother-in-laws, were chavrutas as well. Right? But they were chavrutas, and they had a machloket. You have them always as peers back and forth. And Resh Lakish said, "Lo shanu ela yado." Resh Lakish said, only if you touch your own other hand, this becomes tameh. But if I touch your hand is fine. That's what Resh Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan disagreed. Now Gemara goes back and says Resh Lakish actually retracted this sack of his, and he agreed with Rabbi Yochanan at the end. He was chozer. So says the Gemara, how do I know that? Ve'af Resh Lakish hadarbe. Resh Lakish also was chozer. Amar Rabbi Yonah, Amar Rabbi Ami, Amar Resh Lakish. Rabbi Yonah said in the name of Rabbi Ami, in the name of Resh Lakish, Echad Yado, Vechad Yad Chavero. Whether it's your own hand that you touched with a tameh hand, or you touched the hand of your friend, Be'otayad, with that hand that became tameh directly, lifsol avalo letameh. Lifsol avalo letameh, which means makes the kodesh number 4, reveal tumah, but not shlishi tumah. In other words, let's review this, the din that the Gemara is saying, because now the Gemara is going to say that this is machloket Tanaim. Both Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan are saying that if I touched tumah and now my left hand, I touch my other hand or your hand, doesn't make a difference. That hand becomes shlishi, and now if I handle kodesh, the kodesh becomes pasul, which means revi. That's the halakha that we are learning so far, and that is a shita of Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Now the Gemara says this really is not machloket Amoraim. Rabbi Yochanan is what generation of Amoraim? First generation of Amoraim. He was a Talmud of who? Of Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Rabbi Yochanan is a student of Rabbi Yehuda Anasi. The Gemara says in Masechet Chulin, Daf Kuf Lamed Zayin, that Rabbi Yochanan, even though that Rabbi Yochanan was very proud of being an Eretz Yisrael Jew, to the degree that he was surprised, we had this in Gemara in Masechet Brachot of hey, he was surprised that there are old people in Bavel. He said, you know, if the pasuk says only you only become old in Eretz Yisrael, the schut of Eretz Yisrael. They told him there are zekenim in Bavel. They said, oh, what? He was a very proud Eretz Yisrael Jew until they said, oh, they go to Amud Yomi early in the morning and they go late at night to night seder. So, oh, mashkim u'ma'ariv leBeit HaMikdash, that gives you arichut yamim. That's what it says. But even with all of that he felt that Eretz Yisrael, the Torah of Eretz Yisrael, he himself said, Yesh itli rav beBavel. My Rebbe lives in Bavel. Who was his Rebbe? Who was his Rebbe? Rav. Rav and Shmuel. Rav was, Rabbi Yochanan considered Rav as his Rebbe. And he said, so me and him, we were together, Talmidim of Rabbi Yehuda Anasi in Eretz Yisrael, and he sat 17 shuras in front of me, right? That means really the whole Bet Midrash was, you know, the whole thing was 18 shuras, whatever it is. So 17 shuras in front of me. He was in the first one. And when he spoke with Rebbe in learning in the middle of the shiur, nobody had a clue what they're talking about, right? That's how big Rav was in the eyes of Rabbi Yochanan, right? Which, by the way, opens a very interesting door to understanding why halacha is always like Rabbi Yochanan if there's a machloket Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, right? Halacha is always not only that, the Gemara there says that even when we have to go, even when he died, when Rav died, Rav was much older than all of them. Rav is Tana Upalik. Rav could be considered Tana even if we need him to be. If we're stuck back against the wall with the shita of Rav that doesn't work, we could say, oh, Rav is Tana, and he could have his own shita arguing with all the other Tanaim. You don't say that by Rabbi Yochanan, you don't say that by Shmuel, right? But when he died, Shmuel was offended. So what? He was your Rebbe. I'm not your Rebbe. Gemara says he sent him 300 camelots, which is guzma of she'elot in sfekot of terefot harei. Yochanan said, oh, wow. Shmuel also is my Rebbe. And yet, the halacha still is Rav and Shmuel, both of them agreeing with each other versus Rabbi Yochanan. Halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan. That's an interesting topic to explore why that is. But nevertheless, Rabbi Yochanan felt that you know, he was in Eretz Yisrael, and Eretz Yisrael gave you arichut yamim and greatness in Torah, but nevertheless he was subordinate to Rav, and he was a Talmud of Rabbi Yehuda Anasi. Now says the Gemara, both Rav, Yochanan, and Rish Lakish, both of them hold like this. Now they are the first generation of Amoraim, but they're Amoraim. And the Gemara is going to say this is really machloket Tanaim, right? Early is machloket started earlier on, and Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish are one side of the machloket. There is a whole other side to this as well, right? So now before we go this again, what's the shita of Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish? Their shita is my hand sheni letumah touches my other hand or my friend's hand. That second hand becomes shlishi letumah. You touch kodesh becomes revi letumah. Right? That's what they hold. Says the Gemara. Velifsol ava letameh. This that the kodesh becomes revi'i, not shlishi, tanaehi. it's a machloket tanaim. Detnan, we learned in the Mishnah, kol haposel bitruma metamei yadayim liyot shniyot. Anything that makes teruma pasul, that means a hand that's shniyot letumah, which makes the teruma pasul, that means makes it shlishi letumah. If you have something like that, metamei yadayim liyot shniyot, it makes your other hand sheni letumah. And now, if you touch kodesh, that becomes shlishi letumah. Okay. V'yad metameh chaverta divrei Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Yoshua v'chachamim omrim yadayim sheniyot hen. Chachamim say no. Yadayim are sheniyot. A yad never becomes shlishi letumah. So yadayim are sheniyot hen. Ve'en sheni oseh sheni bechulin. And sheni doesn't make another sheni. So therefore, chachamim, the Rabbi Yeshua's shita is, my hand touches my other hand, becomes sheni letumah. You touch kodesh, becomes shelishi. Chachamim say no. Hand whose sheni cannot make another sheni, right? Cannot make another sheni. Now the Gemara says, let us say, my love. Why wouldn't we say that sheni hu delo avid, ha shelishi avid? It doesn't make sheni letumah, but it could make a shlishi letumah. In other words, what happens over here is that my hand, Rabbi Yoshua says, is sheni, makes the other one sheni, and makes the kodesh shelishi. Chachamim say, no, sheni can't make another sheni. That's all they say. Now Gemara says, sheni doesn't make sheni, but it makes it shelishi. So sheni makes shelishi, makes the kodesh revi'i, which is exactly the shita of Rabbi Yochanan and Lakish. So you see, amazing, geschmack. Rabbi Yochanan and Lakish hold like Rabbanan, and Rabbi Yeshua argues. Rabbi Yeshua says it's one level higher. Sheni makes the kodesh shelishi, and it comes out that Rabbi Yochanan. Gemara says no, because who says that Chachamim hold sheni doesn't make sheni, but makes shelishi? Maybe they mean sheni doesn't make sheni and doesn't make shelishi either. Makes nothing. Your hand that's sheni is the last stop. A hand that's sheni letumah, if touches another hand, they cannot further go and make a shelishi or sheni or nothing. It's just the other hand, if it's not wet, the other hand stays tahor. Maybe that's what they mean. So therefore, it's not a good proof, the Gemara is going to say. Says the Gemara, my love sheni hu de la avid ha shelishi avid. Don't we say that Chamim hold it doesn't make sheni, but it makes shelishi, which would be exactly the shita of Rabbi Yochanan and Lakish? Gemara says no. Dilma lo sheni avid velo shelishi. Maybe Chachamim say it doesn't make sheni and it doesn't make shelishi. It just doesn't go further from sheni. So it comes out that Rabbi Yehoshua holds your hand that's sheni letumah touches your other hand becomes also sheni and makes the kodesh shelishi. Chachamim say no. Your hand becomes sheni. It doesn't go any further than that. So therefore, this is not machloket Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. So we have to make another attempt. What's the other attempt? Ela kihani tanaim. It's really machloket tanaim that we just had in Amud Aleph 5 minutes ago. Like we started the shiur today with that. Machloket tanaim says the Gemara. Kiha tanai detanya yad neguva metamet chaverta letameh bekodesh. A dry hand that became tameh, touching the other hand while it's dry, the tameh b'kodesh avalo litruma. It makes it tameh for touching kodesh, but not for teruma. Divrei Rabbi, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda Omer, ota yad lifsol avalo letameh. He holds, Rabbi Yossi holds, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda holds that hand that touches the other hand makes it only lifsol, but not letameh. In other words, Rabbi holds my first hand that's sheni touches my second hand. This also becomes sheni, and now I touch kodesh becomes shelishi. Shelishi, and this becomes the kodesh becomes revi'i pasul, which is the shita of Rabbi Yochanan and Lakish. So you see, Rabbi Yochanan and Lakish they hold like Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and yet there is Rabbi Yehuda Anasi who disagrees with that. And he holds that it becomes sheni, the second one, and it's metamedet, the kodesh, not posel, the kodesh becomes sheni. So that's machloket, fine? So we found that the halacha of Rabbi Yochanan Resh Lakish really is machloket tanaim. That's the maskal. Now, the next piece of the Mishnah, we had ochlin ochalim neguvim biyadayim mesoavot. We had in the Mishnah that you could eat tameh food, right? You could eat with hands that are not tameh food. With tameh hands, you could eat dry foods. So the way we explained it in the Mishnah was the way anyone would read the Mishnah and understand it, and the Gemara is going to challenge that. The way we understood it was, well, we know that if you have a fruit that's attached to the tree, it doesn't become tameh, it's mechubar lekarka. Then if you take it off from the tree, still it doesn't become susceptible to tumah until it comes in contact willingly with one of the 7 drinks, 7 liquids, we should say, right? Yat shachatam, you remember that, right? One of those 7. So if it didn't become, we said you could have, if it's teruma, you could eat it with hands that are tameh. That's not possible to understand. Tanya, Amar Chanina bar Antignos. Chanina bar Antignos said, "V'chi yesh neguva lekodesh, v'alo chibat hakodesh machshartan." Do you have even a concept of neguva b'kodesh? We don't have a concept of dry versus wet by kodesh. What does that mean? That means by everything else, the halacha is like we just mentioned, that if you took it off the ground or the tree and it hasn't come in contact with those 7 liquids, it's not susceptible to tumah. So I could technically understand that with my tameh hands, I could touch this and eat it, and still is not tameh because it was dry and not never became susceptible to tumah. But by kodesh, this halacha, the Gemara in Pesachim Daf Chaf discusses this halacha that there is no kodesh is always susceptible to tumah, always. It's considered that it became wet because it's so chashuv kodesh that the chashivut, the chiba of kodesh is 10th amount of becoming mukhshar letumah by means of coming in contact with those liquids, even without having touched any of the liquids. So by kodesh, you never have susceptible, it's always susceptible letumah, irrelevant of those 7 mashkin. So don't tell me that of course by kodesh you can't do it. So what's the chidush then? Says the Gemara. They're always mukhshar. So when you say that you could eat with dirty hands, with tameh hands, you could eat teruma but not kodesh, it has to be a different chidush. Because it can't be that I actually touched with my tameh hands the kodesh. That would be pashut. That's like aleph bet. What? You didn't learn Gemara Pesachim Daf Chaf. It's pashut, right? So that it can't be the chidush. What's the chidush? Says the Gemara, it's a completely different chidush than you would think. Imagine if you took a little pshutek lies that are not mekabel tuma, right? Like there's a piece of wood. You take a small piece of wood over here, and take that. There we go. Right? You take a small piece of wood which is pshutek lies, not mekabel tuma. You stuck the food inside this. Now it's not tameh. My hands are tameh, but this is not tameh. And I stuck it all the way down my throat, or someone else stuck it down my throat. Now I'm not touching it, right? The kodesh, the teruma was tahor. My hands are tameh, but it didn't touch my hands. And me or my friend stuck it in my hand, in my mouth, right? So I'm eating it now. Never touched it. Gewaldig, right? No. There's no, the hands are dry even, right? The question is, now I want to have some chulin that are not teruma or not kodesh together with this, right? I have a little piece of something that I want to eat together with it as I'm chewing the teruma or the kodesh. So now I want to touch that food with my yadayim mesuavot, but I'm touching what? Chulin. I never touched the teruma or the kodesh that's in my hand. Someone stuck it in my mouth with something that was not mekabel tuma. Can I now eat food with it, with my tameh hands? So by teruma, you can. Because we are not choshesh that while you put this in your mouth, your hand's going to touch the teruma that's already in your hand. We're not concerned about it. But by kodesh, we're concerned. We're concerned that chas v'shalom, as you're putting the chulin in your mouth, your hand is going to touch a little bit of the kodesh that's in your mouth, and it's going to make everything the kodesh tameh. Therefore, we don't allow it. We don't allow you to eat chulin with hands that are tameh while chewing on kodesh. But by teruma, we're not that concerned. That's the chidush. It says the Gemara. Now you want to eat a piece of radish, a piece of onion, put it in your mouth. The onion is chulin. The radish is chulin, and you want to put it with your tameh hands in your mouth, eat it together with the kodesh. In that case, the kodesh gazru be'urabanan. By kodesh they made the gezerah. Lo gazru be'urabanan. By kodesh they were not. By teruma they were not concerned. One last line of the Gemara. Ha'onen u'mechusar kippurim. The 11th case in the Mishnah was the onen or mechusar kippurim. Onen is a person that lost one of the 7 immediate relatives, and the corpse has not been buried yet. And mechusar kippurim is a person that went to mikveh, waited the night, but he has not brought the korban yet. And now the onen became a non-onen because they buried the dead. Or the mechusar kippurim now brought the korban in the morning, and last night he went to mikveh, right? And yet, even though the last night he went to mikveh, this morning before he eats kodesh, he has to go to mikveh again, said the Mishnah. What the reason is for that? My tama, kevan de adha itna havu asiri, because in this period they were asur, even though that they even just went to mikveh last night. But because he was asur to eat kodesh, the mind is not on guard. And we are choshesh, we're concerned because your mind is not on guard, is considered a lack of shmirah for your hands. And therefore, if you want to touch kodesh, a chumrah of kodesh is, even though that you don't remember touching anything tameh, if you want to handle and eat kodesh, you have to go to mikveh again, despite the fact that yesterday you went to mikveh, because within last night until now, it was asur for you to eat kodesh, and you may have been off guard, and that hesach hadat, that taking your mind off of it, is good enough for you to now require a new mikveh. And with that, we are done with the first long Mishnah of the 3rd perek of Chagigah. Tomorrow we'll Be'ezrat Hashem be discussing the chomer betruma, items that teruma. Now we are wired now that kodesh is always worse than teruma, always more chamur. Now we will see that there are certain stringencies in teruma that kodesh doesn't have. Be'ezrat Hashem will discuss that in the days to come.